I think this directly contradicts almost everything the administration has said over the past few weeks. It absolutely has. Donald Trump has declared total victory multiple times. He has declared victory, right? Can you say yes or no? Wait, has Donald Trump declared victory? Has he said we won a week ago?
Okay, you're saying that we're winning this.
No, he said that we won this war. The reality is every weapon system that was actually a threat to us is still intact. We just proved that.
But that's not true.
That is absolutely true. Why are the ballistic missiles still firing? Why is the Strait of Hormuz closed? Why can't we get a single ship through it? Because all of the weapon systems that are still a threat are still intact. They still have the enriched uranium. We haven't removed that. They have the IRGC Navy still intact just because we destroyed a 55-year-old Navy.
In today's video, Adam Mockler schools Jason Rantz on Newsnight with Abby Phillip. This debate gets heated fast because it comes down to one simple question. Are we actually winning or just saying we are? Adam's side hits harder when you look at reality. If key threats are still active and places like the Strait of Hormuz, where about 20% of global oil passes, aren't fully secure, then it's hard to call it a clear success. And historically, we've seen this before. Early victories don't always mean the conflict is actually over. But before we dive into today's video, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more videos like this one.
I mean, the system is working, right? There was evidence that Letitia James may have committed some mortgage fraud that was looked into, and ultimately a jury of her peers decided that wasn't legitimate. So I think there was...
I'm glad the system is working against the person who's actively trying to destroy it. I mean, the beautiful part of America is that we have institutions and checks and balances that are separate from the president. And you can see time and time again, Donald Trump is trying to bully other institutions under his wing. So we can look at Jerome Powell at the Federal Reserve. If you look at countries where the president is able to control monetary policy, these are some of the worst countries in the world, right? You do not want the president controlling monetary policy. This has happened in countries like Venezuela. Let's take this over to the DOJ. You do not want the president directing the DOJ to prosecute people, to indict people, and that is exactly what we saw. We just watched a clip of Pam Bondi saying, there will never be an enemies list at the DOJ. Well, Abby just read off an enemies list that Donald Trump quite literally sent out. Has any Democrat, did Joe Biden do that? Is there any example of Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, or any of them having an enemies list?
Letitia James and Alvin Bragg, people literally ran on putting Donald Trump in jail. I think we can all agree that there was politicization.
So, but in answer to his question, which is important, is there an example that you all can cite of the president directing the investigation or the prosecution
staff did not tweet on his behalf
anyone?
No, they didn't put it out there in public.
All right, well, good. I'm glad that we're in agreement on that.
There's agreement on that. The president is more public about this, and I don't think that is a smart move from
it's not that he's more public about it. It's that he is doing it when there is zero evidence that it was done by the people that he claims did it to him. You guys are attributing investigations in Georgia and investigations in New York to Joe Biden with no proof. That doesn't make any sense. I'm sorry, it does not make sense.
Yeah, this is the second cabinet figure in a few weeks who's been fired. I think most Republicans would look at that, though, and say, look, Trump is eager to find somebody who is competent. And when you look at the things that a lot of Republicans are eager for the attorney general to do, I don't think the lawfare is, and I think as Jason mentioned, a lot of it's going after Antifa. That's a big part of it. A lot of it's going after some of the foreign money that's funding Code Pink and some of the protests.
But he wants the lawfare. I mean, is that appropriate?
Well, so no, but I wouldn't frame it that way. The same way that you guys didn't frame it when Steve Bannon was targeted.
Come on, no Democrat sent out a tweet asking to prosecute 3 specific people.
You had people who said that you wanted to throw Donald Trump
from a Democrat?
in jail, and you wanted to take him off of a ballot so he couldn't run for president.
Who are these people?
The entire state of Colorado and the Democratic Party.
Okay,
so clearly, this idea, the framing, I think your point is a valid one when it comes to
that is very
optics.
different from the president directing his attorney general in public, mind you, as he did. Pam, I've reviewed the 30 statements. What about Comey, Adam Schiff, Letitia? He publicly, right? He's doing this. It's very different from a state doing whatever they're doing, from a local, a district attorney prosecuting a case. That is different. When the president says, why are you not prosecuting these people who I hate?
The idea of separating powers isn't just some abstract concept. It's there to prevent exactly this kind of situation. The Department of Justice, for example, has long operated with a level of independence from the White House. Even presidents from both parties have generally avoided publicly calling for specific prosecutions, because once that line gets crossed, it starts to look less like justice and more like politics. And there's a reason for that. When leaders in other countries have taken control over law enforcement or central institutions, it often leads to instability. You can look at cases like Turkey or Venezuela, where political influence over courts and financial systems has been linked to weaker institutions and economic problems. That's why in the US, agencies like the DOJ and the Federal Reserve are structured to operate independently, to keep decisions based on law and data, not political pressure. There's also a key difference Abby is getting at between rhetoric and direct action. Politicians criticizing each other or even saying someone should be investigated isn't new. That's been happening forever. But there's a clear line between that and a sitting president openly pushing for specific individuals to be prosecuted. Historically, that's been seen as crossing into dangerous territory because it puts pressure on institutions that are supposed to stay neutral. And the courts themselves show why that independence matters. In high-profile cases, whether it's investigations into public officials or controversial figures, outcomes still go through juries, judges, and legal standards. That's what keeps the system credible. Once people start believing outcomes are being directed from the top, trust in the entire system starts to break down.
Broke laws.
Okay,
now,
but it's
you
not
can
his place
disagree
to do
as to
that.
whether or not they broke any laws, and you can have a fair argument, I think, about the appropriateness of the president doing it. But I do think that the framing is
So
important.
you're defending it then?
I'm defending the president saying someone, in his view, broke the law, and we should be targeting that person. The same exact way Democrats said that about Donald Trump, and it wasn't framed as Donald Trump is being targeted as a political
Jason,
adversary.
you're making that sound as if it's reasonable, and it's not, okay? The president making a unilateral determination in his own mind that somebody has broken the law without providing, by the way, any proof of that, and then directing an investigation into that person is
Calling for an investigation versus
that is
directing is
not
different.
that is not appropriate.
But let me
Okay,
try-
I'm sorry. If you don't like partisan prosecutions, you should also not like that. At that first concert, Springsteen attacked Trump, called him a snowflake who can't handle the truth and is destroying the country's reputation. He also accused the White House of corruption unmatched in American history. And I guess Trump kind of just fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. Not surprising that Springsteen is getting under his skin, but the president seems to be, I don't know, really moved by this always.
I'm just so sick of I'm so sick of the president of the United States spending valuable time attacking random celebrities. He danced on Rob Reiner's grave. When Mueller died, he celebrated it. He's honestly morally inferior with the way he celebrates these deaths. It's just awful to see. I'm a young dude who's always looking for moral clarity from our leadership. I want to look up to our leaders and be able to learn lessons from them. What lessons do you think I learned from Donald Trump?
Don't look to DC for moral clarity.
No, I'm
That's
saying-
the advice I think anyone
Well,
could give
Obama,
you.
I could have looked up to Obama and actually learned patience. I could have looked up to Obama and learned gratitude. If I look to Trump, I'm just like, I don't even know what I learned from that. Bully everyone around you, isolate your allies, be an absolute asshole to anyone who interacts with you. What's the lesson that I'm supposed to take from this guy?
If Springsteen called him thin-skinned, Trump seems to be living up to that.
The people opposing us are the same people who and think of this, who've wasted $6 trillion on wars in the Middle East. We could have rebuilt our country twice. That have produced only more terrorism, more death, more suffering. Imagine if that money had been spent right here in our home. We've totally destabilized the Middle East. And if you think about it, $6 trillion, and it was far better 15 years ago.
He was arguing that we shouldn't be spending money on regime change wars overseas, and we should spend that money on our people here at home. That was a common refrain when he was running for president. That's one of the things that differentiated him from his competitors in that.
Yes, but the context of that original statement was about wars that he did not believe were in our best interests. He's obviously making a different case.
Who defines
with
our best
this.
interest?
Now, the president of the United States and the people who represent us. They're part of the
so
whole
Barack
process.
Obama
yes.
defined our best
So
interest.
they weren't our best
That was
interest
Yeah, and
before.
we can. I'm not saying it's illegitimate. To
No, you
take
just
a
said they
position.
weren't in our
I'm
best
simply
interests, but those were in our best interests by your own definition, because the president said they were in our best
Oh,
interests.
I don't know what conversation you're listening to.
In the US system, there's a long-standing norm that the president doesn't directly push for specific individuals to be prosecuted. Even when there are serious allegations, the process is supposed to go through independent investigations first. That's not just tradition, it's a safeguard. Legal experts have warned that when political leaders start signaling who should should be investigated, it can create pressure on agencies that are supposed to stay neutral. And historically, that's where things can get messy. Countries where political leaders openly influence prosecutions tend to see declining trust in institutions. Once people start believing that investigations are driven by politics instead of evidence, it becomes harder for any outcome, guilty or not, to feel legitimate. There's also the consistency issue that Adam is getting at. You can't really argue against politicized prosecutions on one hand and then defend similar behavior on the other. That contradiction is exactly what makes people skeptical. In past administrations, even when tensions were high, there was usually more distance between political rhetoric and actual legal action. Then there's the leadership angle, which is honestly just as important. Studies on political leadership show that public trust isn't just about policy, it's about tone and behavior. When leaders focus heavily on personal feuds, especially with celebrities or critics, it tends to lower perceptions of credibility and seriousness, particularly among younger voters who are looking for stability and direction. And the point about war spending adds another layer. The US has spent over $6 trillion on post 9/11 conflicts, according to research from Brown University. At the same time, infrastructure, healthcare, and education have had ongoing funding gaps. That's why the conversation about priorities resonates. People are starting to question what those trade-offs have actually delivered.
A president is able to say, I believe this is in our best interest. We all get to disagree with that 100% of the time, if we so choose, or,
for now,
wait for it, we can actually agree with it. The statement that he made yesterday, if you rewind like 20 seconds before the segment, he was talking about Minnesota. And he was talking specifically about fraud. That's literally what he was saying going into that. And if you go over a little bit more, and I'm glad we included the clip at the end where he's talking about the defense, that was the context of the statement. So they're two completely different things. Valid to disagree with either of them, but that's actually what he said.
Even with the context of the statement, it makes no sense. So
it makes plenty of sense.
So we're going to kick Medicaid back to the states.
No,
we're going to kick
Medicaid.
Listen,
that's
we're
not
going
what
to
he's
kick
saying.
Medicaid back to the states, and we're going to raise taxes on a state level, but then maybe lower it on a federal level to equalize it. This makes no sense whatsoever. And how do you think this is going to play for the American people come the midterms? We're saying we're going to have to sacrifice Medicaid.
I think
sacrifice
taking him out of
Medicare.
context is a really smart strategy
Dude,
in that ad.
Is he out of
I
context
don't disagree with that.
24/7? Because everything he says goes
No, that
against
was
his own
completely
best
out of
interest.
context,
It was
and you're
not.
taking him out of context.
Are you okay
intentionally.
with throwing Medicaid back to the states?
I'm okay with states taking way more of a role in all of this. That is a key piece of what conservatives
Are you
believe
okay with
is that we don't want
cutting
a large
daycare?
federal government. And we're not cutting daycare.
Are you okay with cutting Medicaid in order to
I'm
fund
okay
the military?
with cutting out the fraud, waste, and abuse, which
That's
is
not-
precisely
that
what
is
he
not
was
what he
talking
said.
about. Go listen to the
on a
speech.
How many
political-
people? How many people have been arrested?
Did you listen to the full speech?
How many people have been arrested
Did you
due to Nick
listen to
Shirley?
the full speech?
Yes, I did. It was a
And
lunch.
so
Easter
you're
lunch, yes.
arguing. You listened to the full speech, and you're saying that he wasn't talking about Minnesota
Okay,
fraud.
how many
That's
people
what
in
you're saying
Minnesota
right
have
now?
they prosecuted due to Nick Shirley's video? How many people have they prosecuted due to Nick Shirley?
I don't know.
Zero. If this
The
Nick
videos
Shirley
that just
video
came out not long ago. Yes,
in
I'm sure
November,
that-
zero
You know,
prosecution,
so there
zero
was no
indictments.
fraud. We're back to there's no
right.
fraud in Minnesota.
I mean,
talk.
why?
Okay. All right, look, and I think part of the issue is that this war isn't just about what's happening right now. Presumptively, our desire to degrade Iran is about preventing them from doing things in the future. So it's sort of like the nukes and the nuclear material. It's under rubble now, but if we don't get it out, it's still there.
But we know where the rubble is, and I think that's part of the 2 to 3 weeks. The other piece about this story that I think is actually really important is that the president and Marco Rubio and everybody else, they made the case as to why they needed to go to war. And this actually backs up that story. This idea that they didn't pose a real threat, that there wasn't anything sort of imminent, this actually cuts right to that and shows it was in fact imminent. It was a real threat. And this is what they were talking about. And now we're getting some more of that intel. The reason why it didn't come out early on was obvious. You don't just throw out all of your intel right at the beginning when you're starting this kind of military war.
I think this directly contradicts almost everything the administration has said over the past few weeks. It absolutely has. Donald Trump has declared total victory multiple times. He has declared victory, right? Can you say yes or no? Wait, has Donald Trump declared victory? Has he said we won a week ago? Okay,
you're
you're
saying
not
that we're winning this.
No, he said
Yes,
that we won this
absolutely.
war. The reality is every weapon system that was actually a threat to us is still intact. We just proved that.
But that's not true. No,
That is
100%
absolutely true.
not
Why
true.
are the ballistic missiles still firing? Why is the Strait of Hormuz closed? Why can't we get a single ship through it? Because
So,
all of the
you're
weapon systems
saying
that are
that
still a threat are still intact. They still have the enriched uranium. We haven't removed that. They have the IRGC Navy still intact just because we destroyed a 55-year-old
literally
Navy.
everything you just said is not true.
Wait, if the IRGC is not intact, then why is the Strait of Hormuz closed?
You're conflating two separate things.
What?
Weakening the infrastructure and their capabilities versus completely eradicating it. They have not. No one has said that they completely eradicated every single missile that's coming from Iran. That's obviously no.
Did he say we won? Of course.
On the war side, the Strait of Hormuz is still the biggest reality check. The U.S. Energy Information Administration says it remains the world's most important oil choke point, with about 20% of global petroleum liquids moving through it. If that corridor is still vulnerable, then the conflict clearly hasn't produced the kind of stability that victory language suggests, and the nuclear issue is even harder to spin. The IAEA has repeatedly said that military strikes damage facilities, but verification is the real problem. In late 2025, the agency said it still had not been able to verify Iran's highly enriched uranium for months, which means outside observers couldn't confidently say where everything was or what condition it was in. That's exactly why bombing alone rarely settles a nuclear question. Without inspectors and access, you're still guessing. On the domestic side, the Medicaid point matters too. Medicaid isn't some side program states can casually absorb. KFF notes it covers about 83 million people and is jointly financed by states and the federal government under broad federal rules. So when politicians talk loosely about kicking it back to the states, that's not a minor administrative tweak. It means shifting pressure onto state budgets and in many places onto patients. And Adams' broader skepticism about priorities has real context. Brown University's Costs of War project estimates the post-9/11 wars have cost the US about $8 trillion. That's why so many people are wary when leaders promise another show of force while domestic programs are treated like optional line items. So the bigger point is pretty simple. You can argue the administration had reasons to act, but if the core threat still exists, the oil choke point is still unstable, and the domestic trade-offs keep getting brushed aside. People are going to question whether the story they're being told actually matches reality.